Good evening, dear listeners, and welcome back to Mystic Bedtime Stories, your sanctuary for peaceful sleep and wandering dreams. I'm here with you tonight, ready to guide you on another gentle journey through the corridors of time, where history whispers its secrets in ancient lands come alive in the theater of your imagination. If this is your first time joining our quiet community, let me extend a warm welcome to this special place we've created together. Here at Mystic Bedtime Stories, we believe that the end of each day should be a doorway to wonder, a time when the weight of today dissolves into the soft embrace of yesterday's tales. We gather here not just to learn, but to let our minds drift like clouds across landscapes, both real and imagined, carrying us gently toward the shores of sleep. Tonight, we're embarking on perhaps one of our most extraordinary adventures yet. We're traveling to a land where the very earth holds the memory of humanity's first steps, where ancient kingdoms rose like golden mirages from desert sands, and where faith carved monuments from living rock that still stand today, weathered by centuries, but unbroken in their sacred beauty. Take a moment now to settle into your most comfortable position. Perhaps you're nestled in your favorite chair, or lying in bed with soft pillows cradling your head. Let your breathing slow naturally, like a gentle tide that knows no hurry. Feel the tension of the day melting away from your shoulders, your neck, flowing down through your arms and out through your fingertips. Tonight's journey will carry us across nearly 3,000 years of human story, through the highland mists of what we know today as Ethiopia, but which has worn many names throughout its long and storied existence. This is a land that has never truly bowed to any foreign power, a kingdom of mountains and mysteries that has preserved its ancient ways like precious manuscripts hidden in monastery walls. As we begin, imagine yourself standing at the edge of the great Rift Valley, just as the first light of dawn touches the horizon. The air is cool and clean, carrying the scent of wild jasmine and ancient cedar. In the distance, church bells ring. Across terraced hillsides, their bronze voices echoing the same calls to prayer that have marked the hours here for over 1,500 years. This is Ethiopia, the land they once called Abyssinia, Kush, the realm of Pastor John. It's a country that exists at the crossroads of legend and reality, where biblical queens once walked, and where the Ark of the Covenant may still rest in. Holy chambers. It's a place where time moves differently, where 13 months mark the year, and where the calendar itself remembers an older way of counting the days. But before we lose ourselves completely in these ancient highlands, let your body sink deeper into comfort. Feel your eyelids growing naturally heavier, like curtains drawn against the busy world outside. Your breathing is becoming deeper now, more rhythmic, like the gentle pulse of ceremonial drums that have echoed through Ethiopian valleys for generations beyond counting. We have nearly 2 hours together tonight, plenty of time to wander through. Kingdoms and centuries without any need to hurry. Let yourself drift along with the story, trusting that each word will carry you further from the concerns of today and deeper into the embrace of peaceful sleep. Our tale begins in the most profound way possible, at the very dawn of human existence, in a land where our earliest ancestors left their footprints in volcanic ash, preserving for us across millions of years the first tentative steps of humanity itself. But we'll reach that ancient morning gradually, allowing the story to unfold like a slow sunrise over the Ethiopian highlands. Feel yourself becoming lighter now, as if you could float above the everyday world and drift backward through time itself. The boundaries between waking and dreaming are growing softer, more permeable, like morning mist rising from a sacred lake. Soon, you'll find yourself walking not on the familiar ground of today, but on paths worn smooth by countless generations of pilgrims, traders, and dreamers. In a few moments, we'll step together across the threshold of time and find ourselves in a land where the air shimmers with age-old mysteries, where every stone tells a story, and where the very soil holds the secrets of how we became human. But for now, simply breathe and prepare yourself for the journey ahead. Let the last concerns of your day fade away like distant thunder. Tomorrow will take care of itself, as it always does. Tonight belongs to dreams and wonder, to ancient kingdoms and sacred mountains, to the gentle art of letting go and trusting in the wisdom of stories that have been whispered from one generation to the next since time immemorial. Close your eyes now, dear listener, and let us begin our journey to the cradle of humanity itself, to the land of ancient Ethiopia, where our story truly begins. As we drift backward through the mists of time, millions of years begin to peel away like pages from an ancient book. Feel yourself floating gently above the African continent, watching as the great Rift Valley stretches below you like a scar. Across the Earth's surface, beautiful and profound in its geological drama out here, in what we now call Ethiopia, the Earth itself tells the oldest story of all. This is where the great tectonic plates meet and slowly pull apart, creating a valley so deep and so significant that it has become the stage for humanity's first act. The very ground beneath your feet, if you are standing there now, would be sacred in the most literal sense, for it holds the fossilized dreams of our earliest ancestors. Let your mind drift down to this ancient landscape 3.5 million years ago. The air is warm and humid, quite different from the cool highland breezes of today's Ethiopia. Vast lakes stretch across the valley floor, their surfaces reflecting a sky unmarked by aircraft or satellites. Along the shorelines, groups of hominids gather, creatures who walk upright, but whose faces would seem strange to us now, caught forever between our animal past and human future. Among them moves a small female, barely 3 feet tall, her footsteps pressing into the soft volcanic ash that will, over unimaginable spans of time, harden into stone and preserve her existence for us to discover millions of years later. She doesn't know, as she searches for fruits and seeds that paleontologists will one day call her Lucy, after a Beatles song playing on a radio in their camp. She doesn't know that her bones will tell us the story of how we learned to walk upright, how we began the long journey toward becoming human. Imagine following Lucy through her day in this ancient Ethiopian landscape. The sun rises over acacia trees and grasslands that stretch to the horizon. She moves with her small group, communicating in ways we can only guess at, perhaps gentle touches, soft vocalizations, shared glances that convey meaning without need for words. Her world is both harsh and beautiful, filled with dangers we can barely imagine, yet also with the simple pleasures of family, food, and the security of belonging to a group. As you watch her story unfold in your mind's eye, feel yourself becoming lighter, more relaxed. The concerns of our modern world seem very far away now, separated from this ancient trauma by millions of years and countless generations. There's something deeply peaceful about connecting with this most fundamental chapter of our human story, about remembering that we all share these same ancient roots in the Ethiopian soil. The landscape around Lucy and her kind is lush and varied. Volcanic activity has created a complex terrain of lakes, rivers, and forests, with open savannas stretching between them. It's a perfect laboratory for evolution, challenging enough to drive change, rich enough to support life. The climate shifts and changes over thousands of years, sometimes drying out into grasslands, sometimes returning to dense forest, each transformation selecting for new adaptations, new ways of being. In this ever-changing environment, Lucy's ancestors developed the remarkable ability to walk upright while still maintaining their skill at climbing trees. Picture them moving through their days with a grace that we've somehow lost, perfectly adapted to a world that demanded both terrestrial wandering and arboreal safety. They lived in harmony with their environment in ways that were only beginning to understand, their lives following rhythms as natural and inevitable as the rising and setting of the sun. The bones that would eventually become Lucy lay scattered in this ancient soil for over 3 million years, slowly being covered by layer upon layer of sediment. Volcanic ash from periodic eruptions created perfect conditions for fossilization, sealing these precious remains in stone until the patient work of wind and rain would expose them again, waiting for the right eyes to recognize their significance. When those bones were finally discovered in 1974, they revolutionized our understanding of human evolution. Here was proof that our ancestors had learned to walk upright much earlier than anyone had imagined, and that this transformation had taken place not in some distant, unknown land, but right here in the highlands and valleys of Ethiopia. As we drift through this ancient time, let yourself feel the profound connection between past and present. The same volcanic forces that shaped Lucy's world continue to shape Ethiopia today. The same rift valley that provided the perfect conditions for early human evolution continues to slowly widen, creating new landscapes for future stories we cannot yet imagine. Feel your breathing growing slower and deeper as you contemplate this vast span of time. 3.5 million years ago feels almost like yesterday when measured against the age of the earth itself. Yet in human terms, it represents countless generations, an unbroken chain of survival and adaptation that connects Lucy directly to you, to all of us, lying here tonight as we prepare for sleep. The story of Lucy and her kind reminds us that we are all children of Africa, all descendants of those first brave walkers who ventured down from the trees and out onto the grasslands of ancient Ethiopia. In their courage to explore new territories, to adapt to changing environments, to care for one another in the face of unknown challenges, we can see the very qualities that define our humanity today. As this first chapter of our journey draws to a close, imagine yourself standing once again on the edge of the great Rift Valley, but now you're viewing it with the knowledge of what lies beneath. Every hill and valley holds the memory of our earliest ancestors. Every stone might conceal the fossilized evidence of humanity's first steps. The sun is setting over this ancient landscape, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose that haven't changed in millions of years. As darkness falls gently over the valley, you can almost hear the soft voices of our earliest ancestors, settling in for another night under the vast African sky, protected by their small fires and the warmth of being together. Let that same sense of ancient security wash over you now as we prepare to move forward in time, to witness how these same Ethiopian highlands would eventually give birth to one of Africa's greatest civilizations. But that story will unfold gradually, gently, carrying you ever deeper into the peaceful embrace of sleep and dreams. Time flows like a gentle river around us now, carrying us forward through millennia as civilizations begin to bloom in the Ethiopian highlands. We drift past countless generations, past the slow development of agriculture, past the first tentative settlements, until we arrive at a moment around the 8th century before Christ, when something remarkable begins to take shape in the northern regions of what would one day become Ethiopia. Feel yourself floating down through layers of time until your feet touch the sun-warmed stone of an ancient city. The air here carries new scents, now incense burning in temple courtyards, the metallic tongue of bronze being worked by skilled craftsmen, spices from distant lands being weighed and measured in busy marketplaces. This is the world of D'mt, a kingdom whose very name whispers of mystery and forgotten grandeur. The people moving through these streets would look familiar to us today, their faces bearing the noble features that still characterize the highlands of Ethiopia. But their world is one of transition, a bridge between the simple village life of their ancestors and the complex civilization that will eventually become the great kingdom of Aksum. They are learning to work iron and bronze, to read and write, in scripts borrowed and adapted from across the Red Sea, to organize themselves into something far more sophisticated than scattered tribal communities. let your imagination carry you to the court of a DMT ruler, perhaps King Amna or one of his successors, whose names have survived on stone inscriptions that still puzzle archaeologists today. The royal compound rises on a hilltop, its walls built of precisely fitted stone blocks that will endure for thousands of years. Inside, in rooms lit by oil lamps and warmed by braziers burning aromatic woods, the king meets with merchants who have traveled from the kingdoms of South Arabia, from the land of Saba that we know today as Yemen. These visitors from across the Yamadev Red Sea bring more than just trade goods, though their caravans certainly carry treasures that make the court gasp with wonder. They bring frankincense and myrrh, those precious resins that will burn in temples throughout the ancient world. They bring fine textiles woven with patterns that speak of distant looms, jewelry crafted by artisans whose techniques are closely guarded secrets. But most importantly, they bring ideas. Picture yourself sitting quietly in a corner of the royal hall, invisible as a dreamer should be, watching as these cultural exchanges unfold like flowers opening to the sun. The Sabaean visitors share their system of writing, those elegant characters that curve and flow like water, carrying meaning across time and space. The Dan scribes adapt these letters to their own language, creating inscriptions that will survive carved in stone long after the voices that spoke these words have faded into silence. The influence flows both ways, of course, as it always does. When cultures meet in friendship rather than conquest, the Arabian visitors marvel at the quality of Ethiopian gold, at the strength and beauty of the iron weapons forged by local smiths, at the abundance of ivory from elephants that roam the valleys and plains. They speak in hushed, respectful tones of the Ethiopian mastery of agriculture, the way these highland farmers have learned to coax abundance from terraced hillsides and seasonal rains. As you observe this ancient cultural dance, feel your own body relaxing deeper into comfort, your breathing becoming as rhythmic and peaceful as the ebb and flow of tides across the Red Sea that connects these civilizations. There's something deeply soothing about witnessing these moments of peaceful exchange, these times when human beings reached across differences of language and custom to share the best of what they had learned. The DMT kingdom prospers because it sits at one of the world's great crossroads. Caravans heading south toward the gold mines and ivory hunting grounds of the interior must pass through DMT territory. Ships crossing the Red Sea from Arabia find safe harbor in DMT ports. The kingdom becomes wealthy not through conquest, but through the patient work of creating connections, building trust, facilitating the dreams of merchants and travelers. In the workshops of DMT craftsmen, new techniques are born from this cultural mixing. Watch as a metalworker combines Sabaean knowledge of bronze casting with local innovations in ironworking, creating tools and weapons that are both beautiful and functional. Listen to the gentle rhythm of hammers on metal, a sound that has remained unchanged across millennia, still as soothing today as it was 28 centuries ago. The temples of DMT reflect this same blending of influences. Local gods receive offerings alongside deities whose names traveled across the sea from Arabia. The temple architecture begins to show the distinctive characteristics that will later flourish in Aksumite buildings, the precise stonework, the soaring towers, the integration of religious and royal power that will become a hallmark of Ethiopian civilization. Agriculture, too, advances during the DMT period. The highland farmers perfect their understanding of the seasonal rains, learning to read the subtle signs that predict when the life-giving waters will come. They develop new varieties of grain suited to the high altitude and variable weather. Most importantly, they learn to store surplus food, creating the economic foundation that allows some members of society to specialize in crafts, trade, and governance, rather than spending all their time in the basic work of survival. As evening falls over this ancient kingdom, Imagine yourself walking through streets where oil lamps begin to flicker in windows and doorways. Children play games that echo with laughter, their voices mixing with the lowing of cattle being brought in from pasture and the distant sound of evening prayers rising from temple courtyards. The air grows cool, as it always does in the Ethiopian highlands, and families gather around hearth fires to share meals and stories. The stories they tell are beginning to change during this D'mt period. Alongside the ancient tales of local heroes and spirits, new stories arrive with the merchants and travelers. Tales of great kingdoms across the sea, of gods and heroes from distant lands, of possibilities that stretch beyond the familiar horizons of village life. These stories plant seeds that will eventually grow into the grand narratives of Ethiopian identity, the legends of kings and queens that will inspire generations yet unborn. Feel yourself becoming part of this gentle evening rhythm, your consciousness, drifting like smoke from those ancient hearth fires. The D'mt kingdom represents something beautiful in human development, a time when growth came through curiosity rather than conquest, when prosperity flowed from cooperation rather than domination. It's a reminder that civilization can advance through the patient work of building connections and sharing knowledge. As we prepare to leave this kingdom of traders and craftsmen, of scribes and farmers, let your mind hold on to the essential lesson of D'mt, that the greatest treasures often come not from the ground beneath our feet, but from the willingness to welcome strangers, to learn from those who come from far away, to see in every visitor the possibility of new wisdom and unexpected friendship. The kingdom of D'mt will eventually fade, as all earthly kingdoms do, but its legacy will live on in the great civilization that rises from its foundations, in the precise stonework of later buildings, in the sophisticated trade networks that span continents, in the unique blend of African and Arabian influences that gives Ethiopian culture its distinctive character. The spirit of DMT will endure. Now, as we drift forward through time once more, let yourself sink deeper into the peaceful state that comes from contemplating these ancient rhythms of human cooperation and growth. Soon we will witness the rise of something even more magnificent, a kingdom that will become known throughout the ancient world as one of the four great powers of its age. Time continues to flow around us like warm honey, carrying us gently forward through the centuries until we arrive at a moment of extraordinary transformation. It is the first century of the Common Era, and in the highlands of northern Ethiopia, something magnificent is stirring. The small trading settlements and royal compounds of the DMT period are giving way to something far grander, the birth of Aksum, a kingdom that will soon command respect from Rome itself. Feel yourself descending through the early morning mist that often shrouds these highland valleys, until your feet touch the cobblestone streets of a city unlike anything that has existed in this region before. The very air seems to hum with ambition and possibility. This is Aksum in its glory days, when caravans arrive daily from across the known world, when ships crowd the harbors of distant Ajulis, carrying goods that will make their way up the challenging mountain roads to fill the royal treasuries. As you walk these ancient streets, imagine the wonder that must have filled the hearts of visitors arriving here for the first time. Rising before your monuments, unlike anything in the world, towering stone obelisks that pierce the sky like prayers carved in granite. These are the stelae of Aksum, some reaching heights of over 100 feet, their surfaces carved with intricate patterns that speak of doors and windows, as if they were buildings stretched impossibly tall and transformed into solid stone. The largest of these monuments required the coordination of hundreds of workers, the quarrying and transport of stones weighing hundreds of tons, engineering knowledge that rivaled anything achieved by the Romans or Persians of the same era. Yet they were raised not as monuments to war or conquest, but as markers of a kingdom that had found prosperity through the patient work of trade and diplomacy. Let your gaze wander to the royal compound that spreads across the hilltop above the city. Here, in palaces built of precisely fitted stone blocks, rules a king whose authority extends from the Red Sea coast to the highlands of central Ethiopia. The title he bears, Nebuchadnezzar, King of Kings, speaks of the complexity of his realm. A kingdom of kingdoms united under Aksumite leadership, not through force alone, but through the magnetic attraction of prosperity and prestige. Picture yourself as an invisible observer in the royal throne room, watching as ambassadors arrive from distant lands to pay their respects to the Aksumite ruler. Here comes a delegation from Byzantium, the Eastern Roman Empire, their purple robes and golden ornaments marking them as representatives of one of the world's great powers. They treat the Aksumite king as an equal, for they know that Aksum controls trade routes essential to their own prosperity. From another direction arrive merchants from India, their ships having sailed across the Arabian Sea, bearing cargoes of silk, spices, and precious stones. They too approach with respect, for they understand that without Aksumite cooperation, their goods cannot reach the markets of Egypt and the Mediterranean. The frankincense and myrrh that burn in temples throughout the Roman world flows through Aksumite ports. The ivory that decorates palaces from Constantinople to Cordoba passes through Aksumite hands. But perhaps most remarkably, in the corner of the throne room, scribes are at work minting coins, the first African kingdom south of Egypt to create its own currency. These small circles of gold, silver, and bronze bear the image of the king himself, his crown carefully detailed, his name inscribed in the elegant GS script that has evolved from the writing system introduced during the DMT period. Feel the weight of one of these ancient coins in your imaginary palm. It's warm from the African sun, solid and substantial, a testament to the confidence of a kingdom that expects its currency to be accepted from the markets of Alexandria to the trading posts of Ceylon. On one side, the royal portrait. On the other, often a cross, for this is a kingdom where Christianity will soon take root and flourish. As you examine this coin, let yourself be amazed by what it represents. This small piece of metal is evidence of mathematical knowledge, artistic skill, international diplomacy, and economic sophistication. It tells us that Aksum was not merely wealthy, but organized, not merely powerful, but trusted. Merchants across the ancient world accepted Aksumite coins because they knew the kingdom that issued them was stable, reliable, and likely to endure. The wealth that flows through Aksum comes from its perfect position at the crossroads of Africa, Arabia, and a wider world. Caravans arriving from the south bring gold dust gathered from riverbeds deep in the interior, elephant tusks that will become decorative objects in distant palaces, exotic animals for the amusement of foreign courts, and slaves a reality we must acknowledge even as it troubles our modern sensibilities. From the north and east come goods equally precious, silks from China that have traveled the Silk Road to Red Sea ports, spices from India and Ceylon, frankincense and myrrh from the Arabian Peninsula, glassware, and wine from the Roman world. All of these treasures pass through Aksumite territory, and the kingdom grows wealthy on the taxes and tariffs it collects. But Aksum's greatness lies not merely in its commercial success. This is a kingdom that has learned to blend influences from across the known world while maintaining its own distinct character. The royal architecture shows clear influences from South Arabian building techniques, yet the overall effect is uniquely Aksumite. The religion of the kingdom will soon embrace Christianity, yet it will do so in ways that preserve ancient Ethiopian traditions. As evening approaches in this ancient city, watch as the merchants and craftsmen begin to close their shops and stalls. The sound of hammering from the metalworkers' quarter grows quiet. The calls of traders hawking their wares fade into the gentle murmur of families gathering for their evening meals. Oil lamps begin to flicker to life in windows and doorways, creating pools of warm light that push back the gathering darkness. In the royal compound above, a king himself prepares for the evening. Perhaps he walks out onto a terrace that overlooks his capital city, surveying the realm that has grown prosperous under his rule. The air carries the scent of cooking fires and incense, the distant sound of cattle being brought in from pasture, the soft voices of his people settling into the peaceful rhythm of another day's end. This is Aksum at the height of its power, a kingdom so significant that a Roman writer of the 3rd century will list it alongside Rome, Persia, and China as one of the 4 great powers of the world. It's a moment of perfect balance, wealthy enough to command respect, powerful enough to defend its interests, yet still small enough to feel human in scale, still connected to the agricultural rhythms and family ties that give life its deeper meaning. Feel yourself becoming part of this ancient evening calm, your body relaxing into the same peaceful state that settles over Aksum as darkness falls. There's something deeply satisfying about contemplating a civilization at its peak, a time when human ambition and human cooperation combine to create something both prosperous and beautiful. The kingdom of Aksum represents one of humanity's great success, stories of civilization that grew powerful through trade rather than conquest, that welcomed foreign influences while maintaining its own identity, that created monuments not to glorify war, but to celebrate the prosperity that comes from connecting distant peoples and cultures. As we prepare to explore deeper into Aksum's story, let your mind rest in the satisfaction of witnessing this achievement. Soon we will discover how this powerful kingdom became intertwined with one of history's most enduring legends, a story that connects the highlands of Ethiopia to the wisdom of King Solomon and the mysteries of the ancient world. Now we enter a realm where history and legend dance together like lovers under starlight, where the solid stones of archaeological evidence give way to stories that have been whispered from grandmother to grandchild for nearly 3,000 years. Feel yourself drifting into that magical space between waking and sleeping, where ancient tales feel as real as the pillow beneath your head, where the impossible becomes merely improbable, and where the heart's truth matters more than the scholars. Proof. In this dreamy space between fact and fable, we encounter one of the most beautiful stories ever told about Ethiopia, the tale of the Queen of Sheba and her journey to the court of the wise King Solomon in Jerusalem. Close your eyes and let this ancient story unfold like a tapestry woven from moonbeams and memory, each thread glimmering with the accumulated wonder of countless generations who have found comfort and meaning in its telling. Picture, if you will, a queen unlike any other who ever lived. The Ethiopians call her Makeda, and she rules from a palace that rises like a dream from the highland mists. Her kingdom spreads across the mountains and valleys of what we now call Ethiopia, a realm so wealthy that gold dust serves as decoration. On her floors, so abundant that the very air seems perfumed with frankincense and myrrh, Makeda is not merely beautiful, though her beauty is legendary: skin like polished bronze, eyes that hold the depths of highland lakes, a voice that could charm birds from the sky or calm storms at sea. More importantly, she possesses a mind sharp as Damascus steel and a heart that yearns always for wisdom above all earthly treasures. It is this hunger for knowledge that will change the course of history and bind Ethiopia forever to the sacred narratives of the ancient world. Let yourself drift into her throne room on the morning when everything changes. Messengers have arrived from the north, dusty from travel, their eyes bright with excitement as they tell of a king in Jerusalem whose wisdom surpasses that of all other rulers. They speak of Solomon, son of David, who can speak with animals, who can command spirits, whose judgments are so perfect that people travel from the ends of the earth to hear him settle their disputes. The stories they tell would sound like fantasies if they came from any other source, but these messengers are known for their reliability. They describe a court where the floors are made of polished marble, where the walls are lined with cedar from Lebanon, where the very air sparkles with the smoke of 1,000 sacrifices offered to the God of Israel. They speak of a temple rising in Jerusalem, built with such skill and beauty that even the stones seem to sing with divine music. But what captures Makeda's attention most powerfully are the riddles. Solomon, they say, delights in challenges of wit and wisdom. No puzzle is too complex for him to solve, no question too deep for him to answer. He has decoded the speech of hoopoe birds, unraveled the mysteries of wind and fire, and can read the secrets written in the patterns of flowing water. Feel yourself sharing in Makeda's excitement as she makes her decision. A queen who possesses everything the world can offer: gold, jewels, spices. Power has found something she lacks: a worthy opponent in the game of wisdom. She will journey to Jerusalem, not as a supplicant seeking favors, but as an equal bringing gifts and expecting to give as much as she receives. The preparations for this journey become the stuff of legend themselves. Caravans are assembled that stretch for miles across the desert, bearing gifts that would bankrupt lesser kingdoms. There are bars of gold refined to perfect purity, chests of precious stones that catch and hold the light like captured rainbows, bales of the finest frankincense and myrrh, ivory carved by the most skilled craftsmen, and exotic animals from the deepest forests, all intended to demonstrate that the Queen of Sheba approaches Solomon not as a petitioner, but as a peer. Imagine following this magnificent procession as it winds its way northward through the desert, a river of silk and gold flowing across the ancient trade routes. The queen herself rides sometimes in a palanquin of carved ivory and gold, sometimes on a horse whose bridle is studded with gems, always surrounded by warriors whose loyalty is matched only by their skill. But the real treasure the queen carries cannot be weighed or counted. In her mind, she holds dozens of riddles and puzzles designed to test the limits of Solomon's legendary wisdom. Some are mathematical, involving numbers and geometric relationships. Others probe the mysteries of nature. Why does the moon wax and wane? What causes the seasons to change? How do birds know when to migrate? Still others touch on the deepest questions of human existence. What is justice? How should a ruler balance mercy with strength? What gives life its meaning? The journey itself becomes a kind of meditation, a slow progression through landscapes that gradually shift from the familiar highlands of Ethiopia to the strange new world of the Arabian Peninsula and beyond. Each night, as the caravan camps beneath stars that seem different in this foreign sky, Makeda refines her questions and sharpens her wits for the encounter to come, when Jerusalem finally appears on the horizon, rising from its hills like a crown of white stone. Even the worldly queen catches her breath at its beauty. The city that David conquered and Solomon has transformed into a wonder of the ancient world spreads before her like a jewel set in the Judean hills. The temple, still under construction, already towers above the surrounding buildings, its walls beginning to gleam with the gold and bronze that will make it famous throughout the known world. The meeting between these two legendary figures, the wisest king and the most curious queen, takes place in Solomon's audience hall, a room so magnificent that visitors often stumble when they first enter, overwhelmed by the interplay of light and shadow, gold and marble, cedar and bronze. But Makeda walks forward steadily, her head high, her gifts arranged before her like a challenge laid down in the ancient game of royal diplomacy. What follows is described differently in various traditions, but all agree on the essential elements. For days, these two brilliant minds engage in a contest of wit and wisdom that becomes legend. Solomon answers every riddle Makeda poses, but his responses reveal such depth of understanding that each solution opens up new mysteries. In return, he challenges her with puzzles that would baffle ordinary minds, only to discover that this Ethiopian queen is his equal in intelligence and insight. As you drift deeper into sleep, let this ancient scene play out in your imagination like a dream within a dream. Picture the gradual shift from competition to collaboration, from testing to teaching, from mutual respect to something deeper and more enduring. According to Ethiopian tradition, from this meeting of minds and hearts will come a son who will carry the blood of both kingdoms, the wisdom of both traditions, and the destiny to found the greatest dynasty in Ethiopian history. The story tells us that when Makeda finally returns to Ethiopia after months in Solomon's court, she carries with her more than memories of their conversations. She brings new knowledge of statecraft and justice, new understanding of the divine mysteries, and most significantly for Ethiopian tradition, she carries within her womb the child who will become Menelik I, founder of the Solomonic dynasty, that will rule Ethiopia for centuries to come. But perhaps even more importantly, she brings back to her highland kingdom a portion of the most sacred object in the Hebrew world, the Ark of the Covenant itself, the golden chest that contains the stone tablets of the law given to Moses on Mount Sinai. According to the great Ethiopian text called the Kebra Nagast, the glory of the kings, this most holy relic makes its way to Aksum, where it rests to this day in a small chapel, guarded by a single monk who never leaves its presence. Feel yourself floating now in that peaceful space where stories become more real than reality, where the golden thread of legend weaves through the tapestry of history to create patterns of meaning that transcend mere fact. Whether or not the Queen of Sheba was Ethiopian, whether or not she met Solomon, whether or not the Ark rests in Aksum, these questions matter less than the truth the story tells about Ethiopia's understanding of itself as a nation chosen by God, connected to the sacred narratives of the ancient world, heir to wisdom that flows from the very source of divine revelation. This beautiful legend explains why Ethiopian Christianity will develop its own unique character, why the Ethiopian Church will preserve traditions and texts unknown elsewhere, why this highland kingdom will see itself not as a remote outpost of civilization, but as a central player in the cosmic drama of salvation itself. The winds that carried ships across the Red Sea in those ancient days brought more than merchants and their precious cargo. Sometimes they carried souls who would change the very fabric of a kingdom. And so it was in the 4th century when the warm currents of divine providence guided a young man named Frumentius toward the shores of Aksum, though he could never have imagined the profound transformation he would bring to this highland realm. That picture, if you will, the gentle rocking of a merchant vessel as it made its way along the familiar trade routes between the Roman world and the prosperous kingdom of Aksum. The Mediterranean sun glinted off the water like scattered jewels, and among the passengers was this young man from Tyre, a Phoenician city where the art of navigation had been perfected over countless generations. Frumentius traveled with his brother Odysseus and their mentor, the philosopher Meropius, their hearts filled with the curiosity that drove learned men to seek wisdom in distant lands. But the sea, as it has always been, held its own counsel. A storm arose, sudden and fierce, driving their vessel toward the Ethiopian coast with relentless power. The waves crashed over the deck like the hands of giants, and when the tempest finally spent its fury, the ship lay broken upon the rocks, its passengers cast upon an unfamiliar shore. Only the 2 young brothers survived that night, clinging to pieces of wreckage as the dawn revealed the strange and beautiful landscape of their destiny. The local people who found them that morning were neither hostile nor welcoming at first. These were cautious folk, accustomed to the rhythms of trade, but wary of strangers who arrived under such unusual circumstances. Yet there was something in the bearing of these young men, something in their eyes that spoke of learning and gentle intention that moved their captors to spare their lives. Instead of slavery or death, they were brought before the court of Aksum, to the very halls where power dwelt in this most sophisticated of African kingdoms. The palace of Aksum rose from the highland plateau like a dream made manifest in stone and precious wood. Its courtyards echoed with the sounds of a dozen languages, for this was a crossroads of the world, where merchants from Rome and Byzantium mingled with traders from India and the far reaches of Arabia. The air was perfumed with frankincense and myrrh, those sacred resins that had made this kingdom wealthy beyond measure. And it was here, in these halls of power and plenty, that young Frumentius would begin his true life's work. The king who received them was a man of wisdom and curiosity. Intrigued by these educated foreigners who spoke of distant lands and strange philosophies, he saw in them not merely survivors of a shipwreck, but potential treasures greater than gold or ivory. And so Frumentius and his brother found themselves elevated to positions of trust within the royal household, their learning valued there. Counsel sought on matters both great and small. As the months turned to years, Frumentius felt a stirring in his heart that he had never known before. He began to seek out the Christian merchants who occasionally passed through Aksum's markets, drawn by something he could not yet name but could not ignore. In quiet conversations beneath the stars, in whispered prayers in hidden corners of the great palace, he discovered a faith that seemed to answer questions he had carried all his life without knowing he was asking them. The light of this new understanding grew within him like the first pale glow of dawn spreading across the Ethiopian highlands. He spoke of it carefully at first, sharing his discoveries with those who would listen, watching as the same light began to kindle in other hearts. The merchants he befriended became a small community of believers, meeting in secret to pray and to share the stories of a carpenter's son who had changed the world with love rather than conquest. It was during these years of quiet growth and learning that Frumentius came to know the young prince who would one day be known as Ezana. This was a boy of quick mind and generous spirit, hungry for knowledge and already showing the wisdom that would make him a great king. As tutor and mentor, Frumentius found in Ezana not just a student, but a kindred soul who seemed to understand intuitively the truths that Christianity offered to a world so often harsh and unforgiving. The prince would listen for hours as Frumentius spoke of distant Jerusalem, of prophets and miracles, of a God who loved his children with a tenderness that surpassed understanding. And in the boy's eyes, the older man could see the same light beginning to grow that had transformed his own heart years before. It was like watching the sun rise over the mountains, slow and certain and infinitely beautiful. When the old king died and Ezana took the throne, the transformation of Aksum began in earnest. The new king did not impose his faith by force or decree, but by example, by the gradual change that others could see in his governance, his justice, his care for his people. Where once the royal pronouncements had invoked the old gods of sky and storm, now they spoke of a single God whose love encompassed all creation. The great stelae that had long marked the graves of kings were carved now with different symbols. Where once they had borne the crescent and disk of ancient deities, now they displayed the cross, that simple emblem that had traveled so far from its origins to find a home in these African highlands. The change was so gradual, so natural, that it seemed less like a revolution than an evolution, as if the kingdom itself was growing into something it had always been meant to become. Churches began to rise across the land, their stones fitted together with the same skill that had built the great towers and palaces of Aksum. But these new buildings had a different purpose, a different energy. They were places where people could come not to petition for worldly favors, but to find peace for their souls, to discover that they were part of something larger and more wonderful than they had ever imagined. Frumentius, now an old man with silver in his beard and the wisdom of years in his eyes, would often stand at the edge of the palace gardens in the evening and look out over the city he had helped transform. The sound of evening prayers drifted on the wind, mixing with the calls of merchants closing their shops and mothers calling their children home. It was the sound of a people at peace with themselves and their God, and it filled his heart with a joy so profound that tears would often come to his eyes. He had not chosen to be shipwrecked on this coast so many years ago. He had not chosen to be brought to this palace, to become teacher to a prince, to plant the seeds of faith in this ancient and proud kingdom. But as he watched the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, he understood that sometimes the most important journeys are the ones we never planned to take. The Christianity that took root in Ethiopia was not a foreign plant, struggling to survive in alien soil. It grew and flourished and became something uniquely Ethiopian, as native to these highlands as the coffee that grew wild in the forests, as integral to the culture as the ancient rhythms of the seasons. It was a faith that would endure through centuries of change and challenge, becoming part of the very soul of a people who had found in it not just belief, but identity, not just hope, but home. And as sleep begins to claim you tonight, let your mind wander to those highland valleys where the first churches rose like prayers made manifest in stone, where the sound of ancient hymns still echoes in the mountain air, where a young man's shipwreck became the foundation of an eternal kingdom, and where faith took root in African soil to bloom forever in the human heart. As the centuries turned like pages in an ancient manuscript, and the Christian faith that Frumentius had planted grew deep roots in Ethiopian soil, there came a time when the kingdom would face its greatest test of devotion. It was the 12th century, and far away in the Holy Land, the clash of swords and the thunder of war had torn Jerusalem from Christian hands. The city where Christ had walked, where he had died and risen again, now lay beyond the reach of Ethiopian pilgrims who had traveled there for generations to touch the stones that had known his presence. In the mountain kingdom of Ethiopia, where the air was thin and sweet with the scent of wild jasmine, there lived a young prince whose very name would become synonymous with miracle. He was called Lalibela, although that was not the name given to him at birth. The story of how he came by this name speaks to the mystery that would surround his entire life, for it began with a vision that came to his mother while he was still a babe in arms. She was resting in the garden of the royal palace one afternoon, the child sleeping peacefully beside her, when suddenly the air around them began to shimmer and dance. A great cloud of bees descended from the mountain peaks, their wings catching the sunlight like fragments of gold and amber. But these were no ordinary bees, for they did not sting or threaten. Instead, they formed a living crown around the infant prince, hovering and humming in perfect harmony, as if they were singing a lullaby that only heaven could compose. The child's mother understood immediately that this was a sign, a promise of greatness to come, and so she named him Lalibela, which, in the ancient tongue, meant the bees recognize his sovereignty. From that day forward, it was said that angels watched over the boy, that he was marked for a purpose greater than any earthly crown could mean. As Lalibela grew to manhood, his heart was filled with a longing that seemed to come from beyond the mountains, beyond the sky itself. He had heard the stories of Jerusalem, of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, where Christ's tomb lay empty, of the Via Dolorosa, where the Savior walked his path of sorrow. And like so many Ethiopian Christians before him, he yearned to make that sacred journey, to kneel where the apostles had knelt, to pray where prayers had first been offered in the name of the risen Lord, when he finally set out for the Holy Land. As a young man, his heart was full of expectation. The journey was long and arduous, taking him across the Red Sea that his ancestors had navigated for centuries, through the blazing deserts of Arabia, and finally to the walls of Jerusalem itself. But what he found there broke his heart in ways he could never have imagined. The city that should have been filled with the songs of pilgrims now echoed with the calls of muezzins. The churches where Christians had worshipped for centuries stood, empty or converted to other purposes. The very stones seemed to weep for what had been lost, and Lalibela wept with them. He spent weeks walking the ancient streets, trying to memorize every detail, every curve of every wall, every shadow cast by every ancient building. He was like a man trying to capture the essence of a dream before it faded with the dawn. It was during one of these solitary walks through the city that the vision came to him. He had paused to rest beside a wall that had once been part of a Christian church, and as he sat there in the fading light of evening, the world around him began to change. The air grew luminous, filled with a presence so overwhelming that he could barely breathe. And then he saw them, the angels of the Lord, beautiful beyond description, their faces radiant with divine love. They spoke to him in voices like silver bells and rushing water, telling him that he was chosen for a great work. Jerusalem might be lost to Christian pilgrims, they said, but God's love was not bound by geography. He, Lalibela, was called to create a new Jerusalem, a place where Ethiopian Christians could experience the same sacred wonder that he had felt, walking in the footsteps of Christ. This new Jerusalem would be built not with ordinary stones, but carved from the living rock of his homeland, shaped by faith and devotion into churches that would stand until the end of time. When Lalibela returned to Ethiopia, he carried within him not just memories of the earthly Jerusalem, but a vision of something far greater. He had seen in his mind's eye the churches that were to be carved downward into the red volcanic rock of the Ethiopian highlands, each one a perfect replica of the sacred buildings he had memorized in the Holy Land. He could see how the light would fall through their windows, how the ancient prayers would echo in their stone chambers, how pilgrims would descend into them as if descending into the very heart of faith itself. The work began in the mountain town that would one day bear his name. Imagine, if you can, the scene in those early days as hundreds of workers gathered in the highland valleys, their tools glinting in the morning sun. But these were not ordinary builders working with ordinary materials. They were artists and mystics, guided by dreams and visions, carving not just stone but hoping itself into permanent form. The process was unlike anything the world had ever seen. Where other churches were built upward toward heaven, these would be carved downward into the earth, as if heaven were reaching down to meet them. The workers began at ground level, carefully outlining each church's footprint in the solid rock. Then, with infinite patience and skill, they began to carve, chip by chip, day by day, removing everything that was not church until only the sacred space remained. The first to take shape was Bet-Mariam, the house of Mary, carved with such delicate precision that its walls seemed to glow in the mountain sunlight. As the years passed, other churches followed, each one unique, each one perfect in its own way. Bet-Meskel, the house of the cross, Bet-Denagal, tiny and jewel-like, carved too, honor the memory of holy virgins. And greatest of all, Bet-Georgis, the church of St. George, carved in the perfect shape of a cross, its walls rising from the depths of the earth like a prayer made manifest in stone. The legend says that men worked by day and angels worked by night, and those who have seen the churches carved with such impossible perfection into the living rock find it easy to believe. How else could human hands have achieved such precision, such beauty, such a perfect fusion of art and faith? Each church was not just a building, but a universe unto itself, complete with hidden passages, secret chambers, and acoustic properties that made even the softest whisper carry like a song throughout the sacred space. As word of the miracle at Lalibela spread throughout the Christian world, pilgrims began to arrive from every corner of the earth. They came seeking healing, seeking blessing, seeking the same spiritual experience that their ancestors had found in Jerusalem. And they were not disappointed. In the churches carved from stone, they found something even more precious than the original Jerusalem, for here was a place built not by human ambition, but by divine inspiration, a place where the boundary between earth and heaven seemed as thin as morning mist. The most sacred time came each year during Timkit, the celebration of Christ's baptism, when thousands of pilgrims would gather in the churches and courtyards of Lalibela. The night air would fill with the sound of ancient chants, the glow of countless candles, the soft shuffle of bare feet on stone worn smooth by centuries of prayer. Priests in white robes would carry golden crosses and silk umbrellas, their processions, winding through the rock-hewn passages like rivers of light in the darkness. In Bet Georgis, the Church of St. George, pilgrims would gather in the pre-dawn hours, their faces upturned toward the cross-shaped opening far above where the first light of morning would eventually appear. As they waited in that holy silence, surrounded by walls that had been carved by angels, they could feel the presence of something greater than themselves, something that connected them not only to Jerusalem and to Christ, but to every soul who had ever yearned for the divine. King Lalibela himself would often be found in those churches in the hours before dawn, an old man by then, his beard white as the highland mist, his eyes still bright with the vision that had guided his life's work. He would kneel in the silence, remembering the boy who had been crowned by bees, a young man who had wept in Jerusalem, the king who had dared to believe that faith could move mountains and carve churches from solid stone. And as the sun rose over the Ethiopian highlands, painting the mountains in shades of gold and rose, the light would filter down through the openings of the rock-hewn churches, illuminating the faces of pilgrims who had traveled from the ends of the earth to find what Lalibela had given them, a new Jerusalem, a place where the impossible had become inevitable, where stone had been transformed into prayer, and where the human heart could touch, however briefly, the infinite love of God. Let your mind rest now in those sacred spaces, carved from living rock, where the prayers of centuries still echo in chambers shaped by divine inspiration, where pilgrims still gather as they have for 900 years, where the light of heaven filters down through openings in the stone, and where sleep comes as gently as angels' wings brushing against the soul in the holy darkness of an Ethiopian night. As the gentle sounds of ancient prayers fade into the highland mist, let your mind drift now toward the shimmering waters of the Red Sea, where dawn breaks golden over one of history's most remarkable trading networks. For it was here, along these ancient shores, that the kingdom of Aksum reached across vast oceans to touch the very heart of 3 continents. Picture yourself standing on the weathered stone quays of Agilis, the great port city that served as Aksum's gateway to the world. The morning air carries the mingled scents of frankincense and myrrh, of exotic spices from distant India, and the salt spray of the Red Sea. Ships from across the known world bob gently in the harbor, Roman vessels with their distinctive square sails, sleek Arabian dhows, and the sturdy boats of Byzantine merchants, all drawn here by the promise of Africa's treasures. Agilis was no ordinary port. It soon became the main port for the export of African goods, such as ivory, incense, gold, and exotic animals, serving as the vital link between the African interior and the bustling trade routes that connected Rome to India and beyond. Imagine the organized chaos of this ancient marketplace, where languages from across the Mediterranean, Arabia, and the Indian Ocean mingled in a symphony of commerce. The merchants who gathered here dealt in treasures that would seem almost mythical today. From the Horn of Africa came rare woods, feathers, animal skins, Somali frankincense, gold, and precious stones, while from India arrived spices, silk, fine textiles, and pearls. The very air seemed thick with luxury, tortoiseshell glowing like amber in the morning light, elephant ivory smooth as silk, and rhinoceros horn prized for its supposed magical properties. Let your imagination wander through the covered markets of Agilis, where goods such as ivory, tortoiseshell, and rhinoceros horn were displayed alongside more exotic offerings. Picture the wonder in a Roman merchant's eyes as he examines a cargo of Ethiopian emeralds, their deep green depths seeming to hold the very essence of the highland forests from which they came. Listen to the gentle clatter of gold coins. 4. Aksum was the first African country to mint its own coins in gold, silver, and bronze, all in the standard weight categories issued by the Roman Empire. These coins tell their own quiet story of Aksum's reach and sophistication. These coins have been recovered in multiple foreign locations, including as far away as India, testament to the kingdom's vast commercial network. In the soft lamplight of an evening counting house, imagine an Aksumite merchant carefully weighing his gold coins, each one bearing the image of his king, each one a small ambassador carrying Aksum's name to distant shores. The relationships forged in these trading halls went far beyond mere commerce. Aksum was deeply involved in the trade network between India and the Mediterranean, Rome, later Byzantium, exporting ivory, tortoiseshell, gold, and emeralds, and importing silk and spices. Picture the arrival of a silk caravan from distant China, its precious cargo having traveled the length of Asia before finding its way to these African shores. Feel the whisper-soft touch of Chinese silk as it passes through the hands of an Aksumite. Noble, its journey a testament to the interconnected world of ancient trade. But it was not just goods that traveled these ancient highways. Ideas, technologies, and cultures flowed as freely as the frankincense smoke that drifted through the port city's streets. Imagine a Byzantine artisan teaching local craftsmen new techniques for working precious metals, while an Indian spice merchant shares knowledge of distant monsoon patterns with Aksumite sea captains. In the cool shade of a waterfront tavern, imagine conversations in a dozen languages, each voice adding another thread to the rich tapestry of international understanding. The strategic importance of Aksum's location cannot be overstated. This lucrative trade financed the military conquests that would make Aksum one of the great powers of its age, equal to Rome, Persia, and China. The kingdom controlled the narrow passage between the Arabian Peninsula and the Horn of Africa, making it the inevitable crossroads for anyone seeking to trade between the Mediterranean and the Indian Ocean. Picture the careful negotiations that took place in the palace chambers of Aksum, where trade agreements were sealed with ceremonial exchanges of gifts. The kingdom imported iron and steel, cloth, glassware, jewelry, olive oil, and wine, while exporting gold, ivory, tortoiseshell, obsidian, frankincense, and myrrh. Each transaction was more than commerce. It was diplomacy, relationship building, and cultural exchange wrapped in the practical necessity of trade. In the quiet hours before dawn, when the harbor lay still and peaceful, imagine an Aksumite harbor master reviewing his ledgers by oil lamp light. Each entry represents not just profits and losses, but human connections spanning thousands of miles. The Roman senator who treasures his collection of African ivory, the Indian princess who burns Aksumite frankincense in her prayers, the Byzantine emperor whose crown gleams with Ethiopian gold. The religious dimension of this trade network added another layer of meaning to these commercial relationships. When Christianity reached the shores of the Red Sea, it traveled not just through missionary work, but along these well-established trade routes. Picture a Christian merchant from Alexandria sharing his faith with an Aksumite trader over a cup of Ethiopian coffee, or a Byzantine ship captain offering prayers in the same tongue as his African trading partners. These trade routes served as conduits for the transportation of commodities from Egypt, Rome, the Byzantine Empire, India, South Arabia, and Nubia, creating a network of mutual dependence and shared prosperity that lasted for centuries. The kingdom of Aksum didn't merely participate in this trade. It orchestrated it, controlled key passages, and set the terms by which East met West across the ancient world. As evening falls over the Red Sea and the last ships of the day make their way toward distant ports, let your mind rest in this image of ancient cooperation and shared humanity. Here, in this crossroads of continents, different peoples found common ground in the simple desire to share the treasures of their lands. The frankincense that perfumed Roman temples began its journey in the highlands of Ethiopia. The silk that graced the shoulders of Aksumite queens was woven on looms thousands of miles away in China. In this gentle rhythm of trade and exchange, of ships arriving and departing with the tides, we glimpse something timeless about human nature, our eternal desire to reach beyond our borders, to discover what lies beyond the horizon, and to find, in distant strangers not enemies, but partners in the great adventure of civilization. Let the sound of gentle waves against ancient hulls carry you toward sleep, as merchant ships laden with treasures from 3 continents rock peacefully in the harbor of Adulis, their holds filled with the dreams and ambitions of a kingdom that dared to make the entire Red Sea its highway to the world. As the last echoes of merchant voices fade from the bustling ports of Adulis, let your thoughts drift now across the gentle waters of the Red Sea, where winds of change began to stir in the early decades of the 7th century. For in the Arabian Peninsula, a new faith was taking root, one that would reshape not only the spiritual landscape of the region, but the very foundations of trade and diplomacy that had sustained Aksum for centuries. Picture the year 615 in the 5th year after the Prophet Muhammad began his mission. The morning mist rises from the highlands of Aksum as a small group of travel-weary refugees approaches the gates of the kingdom. These are not merchants seeking profit, but souls seeking sanctuary, the first followers of Islam, fleeing persecution in their homeland of Mecca. Among them walk men and women who would become legendary figures in Islamic history, carrying with them nothing but their faith and the hope that this Christian kingdom might offer them the protection their own people had denied. Islam in Ethiopia dates back to the founding of the religion. In 615, when a group of Muslims were counseled by Muhammad to escape persecution in Mecca and migrate to the kingdom of Aksum, which was based in Ethiopia and which was ruled by Najashi, a pious Christian king. Imagine the gentle wisdom of King Najashi, known in Islamic tradition as the Negus, as he listened to these refugees tell their story. Here was a moment that would define not just the relationship between Christianity and Islam, but the very character of Ethiopia as a land of refuge to protect them and ensure the survival of the fledgling religion. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, sent approximately 80 Muslims, including his daughter, to seek refuge in Ethiopia. Picture these early Muslims settling into the rhythm of life in the Ethiopian highlands, their prayers mixing with the sound of church bells, their children playing alongside Christian neighbors. In the cool shade of ancient sycamore trees, imagine conversations between Muslim refugees and Christian locals, each learning from the other, each finding common ground in their shared devotion to the divine. This first hijra, as it came to be known in Islamic history, established Ethiopia as something unique in the world, the first sanctuary for Muslims outside Arabia. In the 7th century CE, one king of Aksum, al-Najashi Ashama ibn Abjar, gave sanctuary to some of the first followers of Islam before he himself converted. Feel the quiet dignity of this decision, made not from political calculation, but from the simple recognition that those who seek God deserve protection, regardless of the particular path they're seeking might take as the decades passed and Islam spread across the Arabian Peninsula. The political landscape around the Red Sea began to shift in ways that would profoundly affect Aksum's fortunes. By the time of the Prophet Muhammad's death, AD 632, the Arabian Peninsula, and thus the entire opposite shore of the Red Sea, had come under the influence of the new religion. Picture the view from Aksum's highland palaces, where courtiers and advisors watched with growing concern as Islamic forces consolidated control over the very trade routes that had made their kingdom prosperous. The relationship between Aksum and the emerging Islamic world was complex, marked by both cooperation and growing tension. In subsequent years, Muslims, traders, and Christian elites oftentimes cooperated. For example, from the 10th through 14th centuries, there were periods of remarkable harmony. Imagine Muslim merchants in Aksumite markets, their scales glinting with gold dust as they conducted business with Christian traders, both groups bound together by the ancient rhythms of commerce that transcended religious boundaries. Yet beneath this surface cooperation, fundamental changes were taking root. The Persian and later Muslim presence in the Red Sea caused Aksum to suffer economically, and the population of the city of Aksum shrank. Picture the gradual emptying of once busy warehouses in Angeles as trade routes that had flowed through. Aksum for centuries began to shift toward ports controlled by Islamic powers. The sound of coins being counted grew quieter with each passing year, and by the 7th century, currency ceased to be minted, a silence that spoke volumes about the kingdom's declining fortunes. This was not a story of sudden conquest or dramatic warfare, but rather the slow, inexorable shift of economic power. As Islamic powers gained control of the most important ports, Aksum began a gradual decline near the end of the 7th century. Imagine the last great merchant princes of Aksum standing on the terraces of their stone palaces, watching ships pass by their harbors without stopping, bound for newer, more accessible ports under Islamic control. The transformation was as much about geography as theology. The rise of Islam brought with it new networks of trade and diplomacy that bypassed the traditional routes through Aksum. Picture caravans that once would have crossed the Red Sea to trade in Ethiopian ports, now finding more direct passages through Islamic territories. The very success of Islam in uniting vast territories under a single religious and political system created efficiencies that made Aksum's role as middleman less essential. Yet even as political power shifted, the spiritual relationship between Ethiopia and Islam remained uniquely complex. The memory of that first sanctuary granted by the Nidus continued to resonate through Islamic tradition. Imagine the stories told in distant mosques, tales of the Christian king who protected Muslims when they had nowhere else to turn. This memory created a kind of spiritual debt that would influence Islamic-Ethiopian relations for centuries to come. Around the same time, the Aksumite population was forced to go farther inland to the highlands for protection, abandoning Aksum as the capital. Picture this great migration, not as a retreat born of defeat, but as a strategic withdrawal into the mountains that had always been Ethiopia's greatest fortress. In the misty highlands, far from the contested coastal regions, the essence of Ethiopian civilization could be preserved and protected. This movement inland represented more than just a change of capital. It was a fundamental reorientation of Ethiopian consciousness. The kingdom that had once looked outward across the Red Sea toward Rome and Byzantium now turned inward toward the protection of its highlands and the preservation of its ancient Christian faith. Imagine the last residents of the great port city of Adulis, packing their most precious possessions for the journey inland, leaving behind the cosmopolitan world of international trade for the secure, if isolated, life of the mountain kingdoms. In the quiet hours of evening, as muezzins called the faithful to prayer from newly built mosques in formerly Christian ports, and as church bells still rang from ancient towers in the Ethiopian highlands, you can sense the profound transformation that was taking place. The world that had created Aksum, a world where Ethiopian gold could buy Chinese silk, where Roman coins circulated in African markets, where Christian kings could grant sanctuary to Muslim refugees, was giving way to something new. Yet in this transformation lay seeds of resilience that would define Ethiopia for centuries to come. Despite its decline, the kingdom of Aksum left a lasting legacy, particularly in its role as an early Christian kingdom in Africa. Picture the monks and scribes who carried ancient manuscripts into the safety of highland monasteries, The craftsmen who continued working in traditional styles, even as the world around them changed. The rulers who maintained their independence. Even as the map of Africa was redrawn by Islamic expansion. As you drift toward sleep, let your mind rest in this image of adaptation and survival. The Ethiopia that emerged from this period of transformation was different from the cosmopolitan, trading empire of Aksum's golden age, but it was no less remarkable. In choosing isolation over submission, in retreating to their highlands rather than bending to new political realities, the Ethiopians preserved something precious and unique that would endure long after the immediate challenges of Islamic expansion had faded into history. In the gentle sound of highland winds through ancient stone churches, in the soft rustle of manuscript pages turned by candlelight in remote monasteries, you can hear the quiet determination of a people who chose to remain true to themselves rather than surrender to the changing currents of their time. This, too, was a kind of victory, achieved not through conquest, but through the simple, profound act of endurance. As the gentle winds of change continue to whisper through the highland monasteries, let your thoughts now turn to something even more enduring than stone churches or golden coins, the sacred art of writing itself. For in the quiet scriptoriums of ancient Ethiopia, monks and scholars were preserving not just words on parchment, but the very soul of a civilization, written in characters so beautiful they seemed to dance like prayers across the page. Picture yourself in the hushed silence of a monastery library, high in the Ethiopian mountains, where shafts of golden morning light filter through narrow windows to illuminate manuscripts that have survived for more than 1,000 years. Here, preserved on pages made from the finest animal skins, you find the graceful curves and flowing lines of Ge'ez script, an ancient writing system that originated as an abjad and was first used to write the Ge'ez language of the Aksumite Empire. The Ge'ez script holds within its elegant characters the DNA of Ethiopian civilization itself. Derived from the ancient South Arabian script from the region around modern-day Yemen, it began as an abjad, or only consonant letters were written, but evolved after 350 CE into an abugida, a sophisticated writing system where consonant-vowel sequences are written as unified symbols. Each character tells a story not just of sound, but of cultural connection spanning continents and centuries. Imagine the scribes who first adapted this writing system to capture the sounds and spirits of their native tongue. In cool stone chambers, lit by oil lamps, these patient craftsmen transformed simple marks into vessels, capable of carrying the most profound thoughts across generations. The script itself became a bridge between the physical and spiritual worlds, equally suited to recording trade agreements and transcribing sacred hymns. As you run your fingers gently across the aged parchment of an ancient manuscript, you can feel the devotion that went into every stroke. Religious manuscripts, including the Ethiopian Bible, are written in this script, along with historical records documenting royal decrees, chronicles, and inscriptions that preserve the history of the Aksumite Empire and subsequent dynasties. Each page represents countless hours of meditative labor, where the act of writing became itself a form of prayer. The manuscripts preserved in Ethiopian monasteries contain treasures that rival any royal treasury. Here you find not just religious texts, but arguably the best-known works of literature produced in pre-colonial Africa, written in a script so distinctive that it immediately identifies its Ethiopian origin. In the flickering candlelight, the Ge'ez characters seem almost alive, their graceful curves flowing like water down the page. Among these literary treasures, none holds more significance than the Kebra Nagast, the glory of the kings. This foundational text tells Ethiopia's founding story, tracing the origins of the emperors of Ethiopia from King Solomon of Israel and explaining how the Ark of the Covenant was brought to Aksum. Picture this magnificent work being copied by hand. In monastery after monastery, each version a testament to the enduring power of the Ethiopian imperial legend. Committed to writing in the 14th century, the Kebra Nagast was derived from Ethiopian oral traditions of the Queen of Sheba and her state marriage with Solomon. Imagine the ancient storytellers who first shaped these tales around evening. Fires, their voices weaving together history and legend, divine purpose and human ambition, until the stories themselves became as real and vital as the mountains that sheltered them. The creation of the Kebra Nagast represents something profound about the Ethiopian approach to knowledge and identity. The philosophical, political, and religious themes in this book craft Ethiopia as God's country and the home of the Ark of the Covenant, creating not just a national epic, but a theological statement that placed Ethiopia at the very center of biblical history. Picture the moment when a medieval Ethiopian scribe first set quill to parchment to record these ancient stories. Each character of GS script became a small act of faith, each page a declaration that this land was specially chosen, that its people carried within them the blood of biblical kings and the blessing of the Almighty. The very act of writing became a form of national prayer, inscribing not just words, but destiny itself onto the pages of history. The preservation of these manuscripts required extraordinary dedication. These codices and scrolls, dating from the 17th to 20th centuries and chiefly written in GS, were carefully maintained in monastery libraries, protected from the ravages of time, war, and weather by monks who understood that they were guardians of something irreplaceable. Imagine the daily ritual of manuscript care in these highland monasteries. Picture a monk carefully unrolling a scroll in the pre-dawn darkness, checking for signs of damage from insects or moisture, gently cleaning the parchment with soft brushes, then rolling it again and placing it safely in its protective case. Each manuscript was not just a book, but a sacred trust, passed down from generation to generation of devoted caretakers. The GS script itself became the mother of modern Ethiopian writing. The GS script is still in use today, serving as the official script for Amharic, Tigrinya, Gorania, and other Ethio-Semitic languages. When you see modern Ethiopian writing, you are witnessing the unbroken continuation of a literary tradition that stretches back more than 15 centuries. This continuity represents something remarkable in world history, a writing system that has survived conquest, colonization, and modernization while retaining its essential character. Picture a contemporary Ethiopian child learning to write. Her first letters in Amharic, her small fingers tracing the same graceful curves that medieval scribes perfected in monastery scriptoriums 1,000 years ago. The manuscripts themselves tell stories beyond their written contents. In the margins of ancient texts, you can sometimes find notes from medieval readers, questions, observations, even doodles that humanize these sacred works. Imagine discovering such a note, perhaps a comment written by a young monk copying the Psalms, his personal thoughts accidentally preserved alongside King David's sacred verses. The physical creation of these manuscripts was itself an art form requiring extraordinary skill. The parchment had to be prepared from animal skins, carefully, cleaned and stretched until it achieved the perfect smoothness and durability. The inks were mixed from rare pigments, some imported from distant lands, others derived from local minerals and plants. The illuminated initials that graced the most important texts required the hands of master artists who could capture divine beauty in gold leaf and brilliant colors. Picture the workshop where such manuscripts were created, not a single scribe laboring alone, but a community of craftsmen working together. Here, one person prepared the parchment, while another mixed the inks. A master scribe wrote the main text, while a specialist added the ornamental capitals. An artist painted the illustrations, while a bookbinder prepared the wooden covers that would protect the finished work for centuries. These manuscripts were more than books. They were repositories of Ethiopian identity itself. In their pages lived not just religious instruction, but the accumulated wisdom of countless generations, the legal precedents that governed society, the historical records that justified political authority, and the literary achievements that proved Ethiopian civilization could stand proudly alongside any in the world. As evening settles over the monastery and the last light fades from the owls, ancient windows, imagine the profound silence that surrounds these sleeping manuscripts. In this quietude, you can almost hear the whispered prayers of all the scribes who gave their lives to preserving these works, the gentle turning of pages by countless readers seeking wisdom and inspiration, the soft scratch of quills across parchment as new copies were made to replace those worn by age and devotion. Let your mind rest now in this image of eternal preservation, where human devotion transforms fragile parchment into vessels of immortality. In the Ge'ez script and the manuscripts it adorns, Ethiopia created something that would outlast empires and survive the rise and fall of civilizations. A written language that could carry the dreams, prayers, and wisdom of a people across the Yao. Centuries, ensuring that their voice would never be silenced, their story never forgotten. In the gentle rustling of manuscript pages, turned by reverent hands, in the soft glow of candlelight, falling on ancient words, you find the true treasure of Ethiopian civilization, not gold or ivory, but the patient preservation of human knowledge. And divine truth, written in characters beautiful enough to serve as prayers themselves. As the soft rustle of ancient manuscripts fades into the mountain silence, let your thoughts drift now into the misty centuries that followed, a time when Ethiopia chose solitude over compromise, when the highland kingdom turned inward not from weakness, but from an almost mystical determination to preserve something precious and pure. For in the medieval period that stretched from the fall of Aksum to the dawn of the modern age, Ethiopia became something unique in the world, a Christian island in an increasingly Islamic sea, a kingdom where faith and identity became so intertwined that they could no longer be separated. Picture the morning mist rising from the highland valleys as Ethiopia's Christians became isolated from the rest of the Christian world with the emergence of Islam in the 7th century. In this isolation, something remarkable began to take shape, not the decay one might expect from a civilization cut off from its allies, but a kind of spiritual refinement, like a precious metal purified in the crucible of solitude. As Christian shipping disappeared from the Red Sea, Aksum's towns lost their vitality, and the Aksumite state turned southward, conquering adjacent grain-rich highlands. Imagine this great migration as more than mere political maneuvering. Envision it as a spiritual journey, a deliberate withdrawal from the complexities of international politics into the pure air of the mountains, where faith could grow undisturbed by the compromises demanded by worldly power. In the highlands of Lasta, a new dynasty began to take root, the Zagwe dynasty, line of 12th and 13th century. Ethiopian kings who combined a nomadic military life with an impassioned desire to build monuments to their Christian religion. Picture these warrior monks, rulers who carried swords but dreamed of churches, who conquered territories not for gold or glory, but to create sacred spaces where their faith could flourish in perfect freedom. The Zagwe claimed their right to rule through tenuous pretensions to succession, based on a legendary marriage to a daughter of one of the last Aksumite kings. But their true legitimacy came from something far more profound, their absolute devotion to preserving Ethiopian Christianity in its purest form. In the flickering light of monastery candles, imagine the prayers offered for these kings, who understood that their greatest victory would not be measured in conquered territories, but in preserved traditions. The Abuna, or head of the Ethiopian church, was always an Egyptian monk appointed by the Coptic patriarch. But apart from this link, Ethiopian Christianity developed largely in isolation and in a distinctive way. Picture the single thread connecting Ethiopia to the wider Christian world, like a lifeline thrown across an ocean of cultural difference, maintaining just enough connection to prevent complete spiritual isolation while allowing for the development of something uniquely Ethiopian. This isolation bred not stagnation, but extraordinary creativity. In the 7th century, the Church abandoned Greek and adopted the vernacular language Shes in its liturgy, making worship accessible to ordinary believers in a way that would have been revolutionary elsewhere. Imagine the first time sacred words were spoken in the mother tongue. How the ancient prayers must have seemed to come alive with new meaning when uttered in the language of everyday life. The visual and auditory traditions of Ethiopian Christianity became unlike anything else in the world. In accordance with a vision of the worship of paradise granted to Saint Yerd, sistrums or sacred rattles were shaken and drums beaten, creating a form of worship that engaged the whole person, body, mind, and spirit in the act of devotion. Picture these ancient ceremonies, where the boundary between earthly and heavenly worship seemed to dissolve in the rhythm of sacred music. But isolation also meant vulnerability. In the 16th century, the kingdom came under attack from Somali, and then Ottoman armies, but ultimately retained control of its strategic highlands. Imagine the desperate prayers offered in mountain churches as enemy armies approached, the faith that sustained defenders who knew they were fighting not just for territory, but for the survival of a way of life that existed nowhere else on earth. The transition from Zagwe to Solomonic rule in 1270 represented more than a change of dynasty. It was a renewal of the ancient claim to biblical legitimacy. Ikuno Amlak overthrew the Zagwe dynasty, with his successors claiming he was descended from the legendary King Menelik I, the supposed son of the biblical King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, in order to legitimize the dynasty's assumption of power. Picture this moment not as mere political maneuvering, but as a spiritual restoration. The return of the Solomonic line represented the fulfillment of ancient prophecies and the validation of Ethiopia's special place in biblical history. Yea to know. Amlak claimed descent from Solomon through a story involving the saint and founder of the Deborah, Libanos monastery named Takla Haymanot, who claimed to be approached by an angel. In the pre-dawn darkness of mountain monasteries, imagine the prayers and visions that shaped these claims, not cynical fabrications, but genuine mystical experiences that convinced both rulers and ruled that they were participants in a divine plan that stretched back to the days of King Solomon himself. The preservation of faith during these centuries required extraordinary dedication. Rare examples of the extraordinary royal patronage of the early Solomonic period that survived were preserved in extremely remote, inaccessible monasteries. Picture these hidden sanctuaries, carved into cliffsides or built in valleys so remote that only the most dedicated pilgrims could reach them, where monks copied manuscripts by candlelight and maintained traditions that might otherwise have been lost forever. From a historiographical perspective, the Middle Ages are a mysterious period of Ethiopian history, as there was comparatively little contact with foreign nations versus the ancient and modern periods. But in this mystery lies something profound. A civilization that chose depth over breadth, intensity over expansion, spiritual perfection over worldly success. The church became more than a religious institution. It served as the repository of Ethiopia's literary tradition and its visual arts, having long enjoyed a dominant role in the culture and politics of Ethiopia. Picture the monastery schools, where young nobles learned not just to read and write, but to see themselves as guardians of an ancient and sacred heritage, where education was inseparable from spiritual formation. This period of isolation created something that would prove invaluable in later centuries, a sense of unique identity so strong that it could resist both Islamic conquest and European colonization. Due to its historical isolation from other Christian countries, Ethiopia developed its own unique traditions that can still be observed today. In mountain churches, where the same prayers are still offered in the same ancient tongue, you can witness the unbroken continuation of medieval spirituality into the modern world. The wars and invasions that periodically swept across the highlands only strengthened this sense of chosen isolation. Each threat repelled became confirmation that God was indeed protecting his chosen people, that the mountains themselves were sacred barriers against a world that might corrupt the purity of Ethiopian faith. Picture the victory celebrations in highland churches, where military success was understood not as human achievement, but as divine intervention on behalf of a faithful people. The Christianization and Islamization of Ethiopia existed not as competitors, but as coexisting phenomena, creating a complex religious landscape where different faiths had to learn to coexist within the same geographic and cultural space. The highland markets where Christian and Muslim merchants traded side by side. You can see how faith, rather than dividing people, could create a kind of respectful diversity. As evening settles over the ancient kingdoms and the call to prayer echoes across valleys where church bells have rung for more than a millennium, let your mind rest in this image of profound endurance. Here was a civilization that understood something essential about the relationship between faith and culture, that sometimes the greatest victories come not from expansion and conquest, but from the simple, stubborn determination to remain true to one's deepest convictions. In the gentle flickering of oil lamps in monastery chapels, in the soft chanting of prayers that have been offered without interruption for more than 15 centuries, in the patient copying of manuscripts by monks who see their work as a form of prayer, you find the essence of Ethiopian medieval civilization, not a culture in decline, but a faith in full flower, nurtured by isolation into something so beautiful and distinctive that it would outlast empires and survive the rise and fall of civilizations. Let the sound of ancient hymns carry you toward sleep, sung in the same tongue and the same mountains where they were first composed, a living bridge connecting the faith of medieval Ethiopia to the worship of today, proving that some things are indeed eternal when they are rooted not in the shifting sands of political power, but in the unchanging bedrock of human devotion to the divine. And so our gentle journey through the mists of time draws to its close, like the soft descent of evening over the ancient highlands of Ethiopia. As the last echoes of medieval hymns fade into the mountain silence, let your weary mind rest now in the profound peace that comes from witnessing something truly eternal, a civilization that chose faith over fortune, depth over breadth, and the quiet strength of endurance over the fleeting glory of conquest. In the space between sleeping and waking, between the historical and the mythical, Ethiopia stands as something unique in the tapestry of human civilization. A land where the footsteps of Lucy still whisper in the ancient earth, where the Queen of Sheba's wisdom lives on in sacred chronicles, where the stones of Lalibela reach toward heaven with prayers carved in rock, and where the gentle light of Christianity has burned without interruption for more than 16 centuries. Picture yourself now standing on one of those timeless mountain peaks, wrapped in the soft silence of pre-dawn, where the first light touches the highlands just as it has for countless millennia. Below you stretch the valleys where our ancestors first walked upright toward their human destiny. Around you rise the ancient churches where monks still chant the same prayers in the same sacred tongue that echoed through these mountains when Rome was young and the Great Wall of China was still being built. Feel the gentle mountain breeze that carries within it the whispered stories of all the souls who have called this land home. The Aksumite merchants who traded with emperors and kings, the scribes who preserved ancient wisdom in graceful geas, characters, the stonemasons who carved churches from living rock, the refugees who found sanctuary here when the world offered them none. Each breath of highland air connects you to this unbroken chain of human devotion and divine purpose. Ethiopia emerges from our long journey not as a kingdom that was, but as a living bridge between what we have been and what we might yet become. Here, in these sacred highlands, the eternal and the temporal meet in perfect harmony. The gold that once flowed through Agilis has long since found new homes. The mighty walls of Aksum have crumbled into romantic ruins, but the spirit that built them, the quiet confidence of a people who knew themselves to be chosen, protected, and beloved, that spirit endures as strong as ever. In the soft glow of oil, lamps still burning in ancient monasteries, in the patient hands of scribes still copying sacred texts, in the voices of children still learning their first letters in the script of their ancestors, the Ethiopia we have traveled through together lives on. It is a land where time moves differently, where the medieval and the modern coexist in gentle harmony, where the sacred and the everyday are woven together so closely that they cannot be separated. As sleep begins to claim you, let your dreams carry you back to that mystical realm between earth and heaven that Ethiopia has always represented. Dream of the mountain kingdom where church bells and ancient drums beat in the same rhythm, where Christian crosses and Islamic crescents share the same skyline, where the wisdom of Solomon mingles with the devotion of desert fathers, where the practical needs of highland farmers merge seamlessly with the eternal longings of the human soul. In your dreams, you might find yourself walking the stone pathways of Lalibela, where each step takes you deeper into a world where architecture becomes prayer, where human craftsmanship serves as an offering to the divine. You might hear the gentle chanting that rises from underground churches, echoing upward toward the stars like incense made of sound itself. Or perhaps your sleeping mind will drift toward the shores of the Red Sea, where phantom ships still arrive in the harbor of ancient Agilis, their holds filled not with gold and ivory, but with dreams and hopes from distant lands. Here, in the realm of sleep, Ethiopian merchants still welcome travelers from Rome and Byzantium, from India and Arabia, creating that timeless moment when all of humanity seems gathered around the same ancient fire, sharing stories and wisdom under the same infinite sky. Let the highland mists embrace your consciousness now, soft as prayer shawls woven from moonlight and memory. Feel yourself becoming part of that eternal procession of souls who have found in Ethiopia not just a place on the map, but a state of being, a way of existing in the world that honors both the practical necessities of daily life and the deepest yearnings of the human heart for connection with something greater than ourselves. The Ethiopia we leave behind as consciousness fades is both historical reality and spiritual metaphor, a reminder that some places on earth serve as doorways between the visible and invisible worlds, where the veil between time and eternity grows thin enough for mortal eyes to glimpse what lies beyond. In choosing isolation to preserve their faith, the Ethiopians discovered something that the busiest, most connected civilizations sometimes miss, that true wealth lies not in what we accumulate, but in what we preserve. Not in how far we travel, but in how deeply we root ourselves in the soil of authentic being. As the gentle rhythms of your breathing merge with the eternal rhythms that have pulsed through these sacred mountains since the world began, know that you carry within yourself now a small piece of that Ethiopian wisdom, the understanding that some things are worth preserving at any cost, that faith can indeed move mountains, and that the quiet strength of endurance often accomplishes what force and ambition cannot. Sleep now in the peace of the mountain kingdom, where the light never fully fades, where ancient prayers still rise like incense toward the African stars, where the dreams of Lucy and Solomon, of the Queen of Sheba and Saint Yerd, of countless monks and merchants, rulers and refugees, all merge into one eternal song of human longing for the divine. Rest in the silence where all stories end and all dreams begin, carried on the wings of highland winds toward that timeless realm where Ethiopia eternal awaits all who seek not just knowledge, but wisdom, not just history, but meaning, not just sleep, but the deep peace that comes from knowing you are connected to something beautiful, enduring and forever, beyond the reach of time's erosion. Sleep well, gentle traveler, in the embrace of the mountain kingdom of light.